Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I'm happy to welcome you to this panel in the Mediterranean Pavilion. My name is Regine Qualmann. I'm your moderator for tonight. In my normal life, professional life, I'm heading the division of North Africa for GIZ, the German Technical Corporation. Happy to welcome you for this panel on climate finance for the Mediterranean, leveraging private sector investments, and then we will also talk a bit on the EU Global Gateway. A lot has been said about the funding gap we are confronted with, and I hope you can all hear me well. By the way, it will be on live stream and on YouTube afterwards, so can also be, promoted more. A lot has been said on the funding gap we are confronted with in climate finance more generally, and also, of course, for the southern Mediterranean region and countries, this is a challenge and a real problem. But new instruments are on their way, and they try to channel more public and private investments towards the green sectors, towards larger and small enterprises, and sustainable growth. Among these, of the new and innovative instruments is the initiative of the EU on the Global Gateway. We need innovative instruments. We need more funding for sustainable investments, for future-oriented sectors and green growth. If we manage to, this also implies new opportunities. It is really looking at the potential of the region, or the potential of the green sectors that we have in the Mediterranean region that I would like to also shed some light on. Not only the big challenges, but look at, really what is there, what we can work with, both on the instrumental side and on the potential of this region. I have 4 excellent panelists here to my left who will assist us in shedding more light in what is already there, what is needed, what are the challenges, and give us from their individual backgrounds some more concrete examples of what works and what doesn't yet, an exchange between them maybe of their views. May I introduce to you on my left here, Mr. Hossam Eldin Abdel Wahab. He's the vice chairman of Banque Mise in Egypt, but has a very broad and vast experience from the banking sector. So he's very welcome to share some of this experience, to highlight, what it really is, what the financial institutions are doing, what their experience is, and where he thinks it can even go further. And if I may ask you then, not yet, I'll introduce all 4 of you first. Also go more deeply into the experience of, really funding smaller enterprises. I think whenever I turn a bit, the sound goes away because then the mic stays behind. And secondly, Yassin Abdel Rafah. You are the managing director of Solaris in Egypt. You have founded your own enterprise after having had some exposure in the private sector, in the energy sector, and of course your studies. And I think you're specifically interesting for your really own experience. What did it take? What did you do to make it work? But also because you're meandering between academics, the conceptual work, and really trying to explain to others where are we and where do we need to go in the future to make this whole thing work. Thank you. Then from the European Investment Bank, EIB, Lionel Rapay. Very happy to have you here. You're the Director in Lending Operations in the EU, neighboring countries, and what we now call EIB Global. So part of the really large operations of the European Investment Bank. You have joined EIB quite some time ago. You have vast regional experience. We were just discussing this, from the Eastern partnerships in Europe to also in the Mediterranean, in the MENA region. And I think it would be very good to hear from you, you know, really where's the EIB, where do the DFIs come in, and how do you leverage private sector investments in, particularly also maybe in the Mediterranean region, in the eastern and southern neighborhood of the EU. So, and then lastly, we have Narcís Yelen here from the EU. You're with DG Climate, and you will share some of the experience, again, of course, turning now to the financial question of things. What is really happening currently from the EU side in channeling the finance into the right ways? We have talked about the EU Global Gateway just a bit. I would like the two of you to touch upon that. So what's new, what is in the making, what is in the preparation side there? Happy to hear from you as well, Narcís. Thank you for being with us. So, I'd like to take a seat in your round and start with the first round of questions here. So I would again start with you, Mr. Abdelwahab. The funding gap the developing countries are facing to achieve the objectives set is huge. I've just mentioned it. And really public and private sectors have to join hands and work hand in hand to transform respective frameworks. And I think from your banking experience, and especially from what Banque Misre also has in your objectives as a banking institution, you could share a bit, you know, does that really work, channeling more funds? Is it an offer problem? Is it a demand problem? Where are the challenges? But what do you also already see happening?
Thank you. First of all, as one of the two panelists out of four from the host country, I would like to warmly welcome you in warm Egypt. We're so happy and proud to host this great event. As a matter of fact, when I look at it, historically we as banks are risk averse by nature. We're very apprehensive when it comes to things that we haven't tried and tested before. So talking about green finance, a few years back was a bit of a challenge. It's something that we haven't done before. It's something that we're not well acquainted with. But we managed to overcome that apprehension. We started with a number of projects across different sectors. In renewable energy, we have a portfolio, a large number of companies working in renewable energy. We proudly financed the fourth largest solar power plant, which is here in Egypt, in Upper Egypt. We're also working with a number of our customers on waste management, water treatment, a whole lot of things. But for us, one very important thing is that these projects need to be economically viable. So, as you rightly mentioned, it's a mixture of both supply and demand. Yes, historically, we were a bit reluctant to engage in such projects. But even when we did so, there was a lack of economically viable projects that we can invest in. Having said that, and again, I can talk on and on about things that we've done on several fronts, whether bilateral agreements, syndicated loans, and we've been working very, very closely with a number of DFIs, our partners like EBI, EBRD, African Development Bank, and there is a very large number of projects that we've done over the past few years. Just to name a few, vehicle transition from diesel or gasoline into natural gas. We're also transforming the way some of the bakeries are working here in Egypt by using much more energy efficient equipment, which is translating into lower consumption of energy. There is a whole lot of things that we've been doing so far, and we will continue to do so. But again, it requires a lot of collaboration from all stakeholders, like DFIs. Thank you.
Just ask one additional question to you. For Banque Misa, how do you do this then? Is there an incentive for the bank to really give give credit, give loans to investors who go in this direction? So do you monitor your own portfolio, your data sheets of what is going where?
Absolutely. Initially, it came from within. We, as banknotes, we were very cognizant of the challenge that we have ahead of us, climate change, and we took the initiatives ourselves. Then our regulator, the Central Bank of Egypt, who are very progressive, by the way, actually issued a number of initiatives and mandates to control that. So, for example, nowadays we have to appoint environmental consultants when it comes to financing large projects, to assess the impact of these projects. We also have to have now independent sustainability departments, not to mention that we're also leading by example. So when it comes to our own premises, we're very keen. We're making substantial investments on that front to make sure that all of our premises or all the new ones are being established as green. We have certifications for all of our new premises. That's about it.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. I would like to continue with the European Investment Bank, with you, Lionel, if I may. Your climate bank roadmap has set out some ambitious goals for sustainable investment in Europe and globally, and the EIB is very present here at the COP27 with your own rounds and panels. So really, maybe you can say something about what has been announced as the new financing and advisory services addressing the just transition. What is it really that is new about what EIB is doing, has in mind? What are your plans coming out after this COP?
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I'm very pleased to participate to this panel. So thank you to GIZ, to the Union for the Mediterranean for organizing this discussion. I think with the COP in Sharm el-Sheikh, it's good to have a focus on this region. It's clearly a region which faces significant challenges in terms of climate on the one hand, with lots of vulnerabilities, but on the other hand, it's also a region with lots of opportunities, solutions to bring, notably on renewable energy. So from the EIB, well, clearly the green transition in the Med region, in the southern neighborhood, is a priority. And we are clearly aiming at mobilizing as much financing as needed as possible. Now, we have to be realistic. Mobilizing financing for climate is a challenge everywhere. And I think after the years of COVID pandemic, now the Russian war against Ukraine, it's even more challenging and even more urgent in a way to mobilize this support. We can see in the region, you have a number of countries which have less fiscal space, less borrowing capacity, simply because they had to reply to the consequences of the war with inflationary pressure, higher budget needs. Lots of countries are now under IMF program or negotiating with IMF to ensure macro-financial stability. So it is a challenge to mobilize funding on adequate terms. And the private sector, and I will come to this, certainly can and should do more, but we are not yet at the right level. So from the EIB, as you said, I mean, we are the European Union Climate Bank, so we clearly set this bank roadmap to scale up our support. So basically around three objectives. One is to mobilize up to 1 trillion of financing for the upcoming decade. The second objective is to have 50% of our financing for climate. And the third is to have all our activities Paris aligned, and it's already the case since the 1st of January 2021. Now we see really three things when it comes to having the right financing in place. First, we need to have good quality, high quality projects being prepared and identified. And this is sometimes a challenge. So for this, we try to mobilize in-house expertise of the bank. We have lots of, you possibly met with some of them during the COP, engineers, economists, specialists, but we also mobilize lots of technical assistance. Just to give an example related to climate, we are implementing the City Climate Gap Fund, which is implemented with GIZ and with the World Bank. And it helps cities to identify, prepare quality projects in the field of climate investment. So in sustainable urban transport, wastewater treatment, and many other areas. So it's a very powerful tool to have high quality projects being prepared. The second aspect is to have the right level of concessionality funding and basically the right amounts also of financing. So here obviously the financing power of multilateral development banks, development financing institutions is really important. And we try to mobilize where necessary grants elements to increase the concessionality. So here we rely very much on our work with the European Commission to bring the right element of concessionality to make the project financially sustainable. And third, this is a private sector mobilization. We conducted an enterprise survey. We interviewed more than 5,000 firms during 2 years, and we released mid this year the results. And we asked the questions to the enterprises about whether they have already undertaken green investment to improve the sustainability of their production or to benefit from the potential of green investment. And actually, in the MENA region, the results are quite disappointing. I mean, it's clearly below what we see in other regions in the world. Now, the opportunities are clearly there in this region. Just to give 2 examples. One on renewables. I mean, the MENA region has the best resources in terms of renewables. The solar irradiation, the constant wind power, I mean, really enables to scale up substantially investment in renewables. The second example is, because of the proximity, notably with EU markets, is to develop green value chains. So really to leapfrog developments, to integrate green elements in the value chains, which then can go to European markets. On this, we see financing institutions, and I think Bank Misr is a very good example, ready actually to do this type of investment. But indeed, sometimes they need support to better assess this type of projects. So here we have put in place a program, the Greening Financing System program, where we help the central bank, the commercial bank, to better assess the risk of this type of projects and to better be equipped to respond to the needs. But we are also supporting directly to offer access to SMEs or to enable investment by providing guarantees or by de-risking investments to incentivize the financial sector to lend more. And this we do it very often in the context of program with the European Union. One last word, you mentioned Global Gateway. So Global Gateway actually is, in a way, the European strategy to answer at scales to these needs. So it will enable to roll out 300 billion of financing, possibly half of it on the African continent, so notably in the MENA region. And obviously we are clearly part of it to enable this massive investment, EU investment on this project. But I'm sure that my colleague from the Commission will say much more on this.
Thank you so much. Very interesting to hear more concretely what the plans are and what is in the making. Maybe shifting to you, Yassine, private sector point of view. What has been said, from the bank's side of perspectives, I would like to see your views, your perspective from the private sector side. What were the challenges when you founded Solaris? What is really what you're seeing today for you, for your company, but also others investing in that area?
So I'm very lucky to be able to answer this question from a multi-dimensional time frame, because a few months from now it's going to be our 10th birthday. So we basically were founded in 2013, early 2013. And the situation then versus now is completely different. I remember at the time we had the project signed and we met 31 commercial banks in Egypt, and not a single bank wanted to touch us. At the time there were very few renewable energy experts within banks, and we were lucky within a few banks, Bank of Masr, to find an energy expert. So we really had to get creative with it and step outside of our comfort zone as a typical developer. And at the time we went to the insurance companies and we structured Egypt's first credit insurance policy, backed by a reinsurer who believed in the idea. And with that, we had enough firepower to go back to the banking sector and ask for project financing. Even then, it was a bit difficult to do because of the lack of the availability of technology and the lack of a portfolio where consistent results could be maintained. So we had to go for a balance sheet financing perspective. And can you imagine in Egypt 8 or 9 years ago with a 10-year payback period, having to convince an off-taker to take the risk of my technical knowledge and ability to procure the plant? And we did it once for a farm, and that was the beginning of the story where banks started to really step into this. Project financing, that equity ratios became more and more aggressive and bullish. Tenors started to get longer and longer. And here we really need to stop and pause and thank actually both the GIZ and the EBRD as well for what they've done on this, because they were really the missing link, because they had the consultants that can come in and talk the same language as the risk committee of the bank, where the consultants in Egypt were lacking that kind of capability. And that was really the missing link where that leap could be taken forward. And once it was, the way was paved and it was very easy to duplicate again and again. And I think at the time we were looking for less creditworthy off-takers that had the ability to go for these kind of projects. But as of today, the situation has changed, and the majority of the pipeline is very creditworthy off-takers. The situation today, I think the biggest inability to acquire financing is related to two different aspects. The first being the lack of clarity on the legislative aspect. It's extremely difficult, and you run into credibility issues if any kind of projects were to be changed retrospectively, or if the development cycle is not fully understood by legislators. So that means the language spoken by banks and the legislator are different. So for example, if you have a permit for construction, that's what you need for financial close. If the law changes before you get your license to generate, that means you're stuck. You've already issued the license to generate, to construct. You've already procured your equipment, and something's changed now, and you've already, taken the money from the bank, and that's a disastrous situation that puts us in a very negative position. The second issue also is related to lack of clarity on the different tariffs, and I think the market is developing a bit slower than anticipated when it comes to the availability of business models that allow for this current wave of interest in renewables. COP27 is extremely powerful, and it's in unison with macroeconomic indicators that are really pushing Egypt specifically to go for a lot more renewables and start using their natural gas to export and to alleviate part of the US dollar crisis. So all of these factors combined make it a prime time. We've seen our pipeline grow from 320 megawatts to 4 gigawatts in the last 6 months with zero marketing budget, simply with clients actually wanting to go green. But the reason I'm not able to proceed with these kind of projects is that we've been waiting for the wheeling legislation for more than 2 years now, and a lot of the clients don't have the spacing available in order to really put a dent into their energy bill. So even our largest projects, 20 megawatt plus with the cement sector, for example, you do 20 megawatts, you're covering 10% of their bill. With the current economics, you're very lucky to give them 5 or 10% discount. So what you're doing today is you're asking them to commit to 25 years of power and give up a piece of the land to give them 1% reduction on their bill. That's not a very compelling argument, and that's not the kind of argument you want to be making if you want to have a green transition towards the kind of numbers that put us in a good place when it comes to our environmental commitments. So I hope that answers your question.
I think it answers several others in addition. So thanks a lot. It's a good experience. I think we can all, have our own examples in our heads where similar experience was made, at least for me in SME background. I hear that a lot. So yeah, legislation changing, that is one thing that you said, the longer term reliability that poses additional risks to bear. And the other thing that was said is that really public entities, DFIs, international banks, maybe technical cooperation can come in as catalysts sometimes. You both mentioned sometimes we don't have viable projects really ready in a way, even if the readiness on the bank side is there. Nassis, maybe on that topic a bit, the EU is active in many different ways on the climate issues, trying to provide technical assistance, trying to channel, trying to provide more funding, more specialized funding into these areas that are really in need and where there is a demand. So maybe you, from your point of view, from your experience, want to share on this and react also a bit on what you've just heard from the colleagues.
Thank you, and thank you. Great to be here and in front of such an excellent audience and excellent panel. Yeah, I'm trying just to be a bit up to the expectations. My mindset and I'm kind of tailored more like a battered international negotiator, and not necessarily with a very focused banking or economic background. But it's still, I think, what we are trying to do now at EU level. It's really, when we talk now in the negotiations, we, the EU, and not only us, we are all the time talking about these trillions that are needed and the fact that we have to align the financial flows with the goals of the Paris Agreement. And I think what we are trying to do in the EU, and then to let this really reverberate, is to really try to align, and at the same time aligning means that we are going to a higher scale, because also the scale of the challenge is different. And today I heard the seasoned negotiators saying actually today is more difficult to access the money than it was a few years ago. It might sound paradoxical. I think it is true on the one hand, in the sense that we live in a more complex world with more complex challenges, and therefore getting the right money for the right project at the right time and at the right scale is more difficult. At the same time, I think there are a lot of money, there is a lot of untapped potential there. And what we are trying to do, for instance, through the global gateway. So this, as Lionel was mentioning, the strategy, it's a strategy of packaging a bit everything that we do at the EU level. We are through the global gateway. What is this actually? It's a sort of a strategy to try to facilitate investments primarily in infrastructure, and primarily in climate relevant infrastructure, which is digital, which is energy, which is transport, for instance. And then what is also the global gateway is a standard setter for environmental and labor standards in that sense. And there is a principle that we try to stick to, which is sort of policy first instead of investment first. So this is an important policy principle that drives our policies there. Then it's that the EU, and then also the development, its institutions, being them also development finance institutions, international finance institutions, plus our banking arms like the European Investment Bank and the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. We really bring our forces and resources together. So that's the principle. Now, this is still at an early stage. It started basically last year. I would know that there is some very good progress, because what it also involves, and this kind of bringing all these resources together, is what we call the Team Europe initiative. So it's the Team Europe approach. Now, this Team Europe approach works quite well. There are already more than 150 initiatives. And now moving a bit towards the instruments. We have the European Fund for Sustainable Development, which is basically a de-risking instrument. It's an important financing instrument in the sense that it also aims, and we hope it will be able to mobilize, for instance, only in guarantees in the range of 130 billion euro. So this is about the scale that we try. Then what is also important with this instrument is that it is very much enabling action in areas that are a bit riskier, or in regions that are a bit maybe under certain types of risks, climate risks included. This is also important. I think then the third thing here is that we are somehow handing over the trust and the money to those that are best in doing this. So it works also through a sort of a call for the development finance institutions, the IFIs as well, to apply for this money and then to give the opportunity to in the countries that they work with to multiply this money. So this is a bit of a short presentation of the Global Gateway and the way it was crafted and thought. And maybe I will, if I will have the opportunity, come a bit at a later stage about how this works also in the Mediterranean region.
Thank you very much. So we have another topic thrown in about scaling up. We really need a collective action in some areas there, and really assemble around certain investment topics, certain infrastructures that are needed, that will be the basis. How does that sound to you, Mr. Abdelawab? Is that something you could connect with? Is that I mean, we see the huge investment projects that are currently happening in Egypt. Is there a collective moment there to really channel more money in the right directions for future and greener sectors?
Well, we came a long way. As my fellow panelists said, Yassine, we're nowhere close to where we used to be 10 years ago. Having said that, I think that everything we've done so far is just a proof of concept. There is plenty more that we can do. I'm not an environmentalist myself, but I'm trying to educate myself. Coming into the COP27, I read a lot of material, but to reinforce the point that you were making, I read some very interesting statistics. Of the 34 billion tons of CO2 emissions annually, Africa represents 1.3 billion. That's nearly 3%. However, when it comes to vulnerability because of climate change and the impact on countries or regions, 50% of the countries that are on the receiving end of the challenge are from Africa. In other words, the problem is originating in certain regions, but the impact is felt in a different set of regions. Now keep that aside for a moment and think of capital flows to green finance. When you look at it holistically, it looks like we're dealing with the issue in a domestic theme, because roughly around 70% of the green finance flows are within the same country. Funds raised and spent within the country. So on one side, the issue is global, but when it comes to addressing it, every country is doing it from a very, very narrow perspective. So I think we all collectively, all stakeholders, whether governments, financial institutions, private sector, we need to collaborate collectively and see how we can address this in a holistic manner. And I can't think of anybody better than DFIs to actually play that role and bridge the gap between the two different themes that I've just mentioned. The way the problem is originating and the impact is felt versus the way we're trying to address it. There is a huge disconnect that needs to be bridged ASAP.
Thanks a lot. I had said in the beginning that I wanted to also look at the opportunities that the region is offering, and I think that is, where that fits in. Really looking ahead, there are so many opportunities to tap. It's not looking at the past for the region, but where could you move faster? Where is leapfrogging towards a greener future a possibility? And for that, really to channel the finance that is there. And has been said, there are untapped opportunities, both technologically and financially. I think this is what you meant when you said untapped opportunities. And maybe we want to zoom into that a bit further. Maybe start with any one of you. Maybe Narcis, would you like to continue on that untapped opportunities and really say where concretely could the region move?
Yeah, maybe just to elaborate a bit more, boiling down to how this is done. So basically, you have the global gateway, but at the same time, there is already a very strong body of cooperation and of structure that have been created through cooperation in the MENA region. And indeed, I think we also undertook some studies which really show that the climate impacts will have some very dire consequences for the region, also in terms of security, and of course is also a prime interest for the EU to make sure that there is a way to be always kind of prepared and to try to look at solutions together. Now, going back to the climate solutions, the global gateway works also is that there are the economic and investment plans. These are basically what we call the legs of the global gateway. They are sort of, in the first place, communication instruments, but they are at the same time they're already drafting and crafting in cooperation with the countries in the region, for instance in the Mediterranean region, on the basis of the agenda for the Mediterranean. So then you have the economic and investment plans, and then we identify flagships, so-called investment flagships. Now in the case of the Mediterranean, there are 4 flagships on energy transition and on energy security that we identify. They are in Morocco, they are in Egypt as well, they are in Jordan and in Algeria. We also identify that actually there are like 6 countries with really excellent renewable energy potential still untapped. The 4 that I mentioned, plus Jordan and Israel. What we are also trying to do as much as possible, we try to learn and to use the experience of important companies in Europe, like for instance Siemens, and the way it worked with the rail system in Egypt. So it's also a sort of a practical component to that in order to figure out how to further do the development. So it's always about the practicalities. We are also working at smaller scales. We are working with the cities. We have these sustainable energy and climate action plans also in African regions, particularly in the sub-Saharan region. So, and this is, I would say, possible also, again, because it's the EU and the member states and also the financing institutions that are all pooling not only their financial resources, but their knowledge and expertise and experience in all these countries in order to find solutions. I would stop here for now.
Thanks a lot. I think that showed it quite, more concretely how it could work to really assemble around certain poles and say, well, this is where everybody would want to move forward. This is where the potential, the opportunity is seen, and then really put a number of issues together there. Back to you, Lionel. When EIB is looking at specifically at the southern region, where are you coming in? Where are you moving in? And who do you really partner with, or which partners are you looking for?
Thank you. Well, I would say our roadmap from EIB perspective as the EU bank is very much the new agenda for the Mediterranean and this economic and investment plan which have just been mentioned. So we really follow and support as much as possible this initiative. 150 initiatives have been mentioned. I think we are participating in 2/3 of this initiative. So I think all the projects, all the topics which were mentioned, we are in it, and this is where we are aiming at. Now, obviously, from one country or another, the potential will be different in terms of development and in terms of, let's say, strategy of investment. But we really try to support on the green agenda and to push the limits. So just to give an example, we participated to the announcement and we will support the Scatec hydrogen project here in Egypt, which was announced 2 days ago. To take the example of Morocco, and again mentioning innovation, we launched a technical assistance to assess the potential on offshore wind farm along the coast of Morocco. So we really try to see where we can go further and where we can push further in investment. Now, who do we partner with? Well, honestly, for this type of challenge, you need to partner, of course, with the governments, both on the policy side and on the investment. Investment because some projects do require support at a governmental level, be it from a budgetary support or grant support, and we need to intervene at this level. But of course, we intervene also as much as possible to mobilize and to crowd in private sector investment. So here, either with partner financing institutions, McMister is a very good example, or directly with corporate company investing in the region. So we need to go through the entire chain, I would say, of potential partners because of the challenge. The last things I would like to mention, and echoing what my colleague from the Commission said, working from policy, preparation of projects, implementation, working with this diverse range of partners requires indeed to have many development partner institutions working together. And here the Team Europe concept is exactly about this. It's really taking the best of each institution, be it EIB, be it GIZ, be it the Commission and other partners to really, as a Team Europe, deliver on this challenge.
Thank you very much. Maybe for the last round, my two Egyptian panelists here. And again, zooming in a bit on the small enterprise issue. Yassine said there was a change also on the bank's side to understand better, you know, what the issues were about and whether or not they could really or would really want to fund something or finance it, that it really needed some capacity development on their side, especially for the green funding for solar, but in the future there are so many other opportunities. Is that something you can echo, that has also happened? So on the one hand, we really need the private sector to put in the bankable projects, but on the other hand, we also need the banks to understand better what these specific investments are about, and especially when they come from startups or smaller enterprises, to look at them, you know, definitely in a realistic, but also in a way that this is their future opportunity as banks. Does something concretely happen there? Do the two sides work together on building capacity on both sides in Egypt?
Well, as they say, it takes two to tango. A few years back, we were worlds apart, but that's history now. Over the last few years, I think we had a pioneering experience in SME finance in general in Egypt, and very specifically on green finance, green projects. The bank I proudly represent, Bank Masr, our SME portfolio around 5 years ago was less than 2 billion Egyptian pound. We're now close to 60 billion EGP in a span of 5 years. And again, that initial apprehension that we had towards segments that we did not penetrate before is something of the past. We were so successful to the extent that we're actually considering opening branches in other countries. And the first thing that regulators in other markets have asked us is, you've done extremely well on the SME front. how you can replicate the experience in our markets. We've done extremely well, and I still believe that there is plenty of room for growth on that segment. As proven evident by our experience in Egypt and SMEs, the initial thoughts or fears from financial institutions when it comes to SMEs that credit losses will be too high, this has proven to be a myth. As a matter of fact, some of these SMEs, their primary issue is access to finance, not the pricing. So even if initially financial institutions and banks reach out to them with relatively high interest rates to ensure that they have loss absorption capacity, that is an excellent technique, and over time when they develop the maturity and awareness of the segment, they can rationalize interest rates. I don't know if Yassine has something to add on that front.
No, I completely agree with you, and I think strides have been taken definitely to speak the same language and to bridge that. But I also want to leave it on a note of optimism and opportunity, because 1 year ago, I want to share with you that we created a joint venture with Amarenco, which is a large Irish-French infrastructure fund, and it's a $250 million joint venture, and it's built on the basis of evaluating assets in Egypt with the private sector for 25 years. So when you have that nature of transaction setup being created, you're really paving the way for an additional or a change in the way these assets are perceived, and the way they are perceived not only on a local level but internationally as well. And that's what I really think the future needs. It needs global work. Local means global reach and muscle, and local knowledge and depth. It needs blended finance. It needs the ability to have local companies that can understand financial engineering and put a part of their currency hedge within the model, and international companies that can step in with the remaining amount and create these, hybrid scenarios that make the model work when it needs to work. And now more than ever, we're seeing it with, currency issues and so on. It's these kind of partnerships that provide real scalable solutions and provide the access and depth to really spread technologies very quickly. And I really think that the banking sector is ready for that. And the positive side is to see that equity is there. A couple of years back, if you had told me, would you have had the kind of equity to consider a 500 megawatt, a 1,000 megawatt portfolio, I would have said no. But surprisingly, the equity is in. And I think it's now up to us with the banks to structure the kind of products that are required for this market to thrive.
We are sharing resources as well on our panel, the microphones there. So I would really like to wrap it up here. Thank you very, very much for your expertise and inputs. For me, it's a very nice opportunity to be had on behalf and in our joint project with Union for the Mediterranean, between ourselves, the German corporation as GIZ, and them. And it's been a pleasure to listening to you here on this panel. I learned a number of things around putting, joint action together, learning jointly, really communicating on to understand the other side, but then also, of course, looking into practicalities there. And then how to organize around joint action. And I think your explanations of, larger infrastructure, concerted action around the opportunities that have been identified jointly within the region, and then try to organize the finance around it. I think this is where really there could be some future in moving in there. Thank you very much for this. Wishing you all a pleasant stay in Egypt, where you so warmly welcomed us in the first place. Thank you.